A massive IT outage wreaking havoc on industries and infrastructure after a faulty software update by CrowdStrike, an American cybersecurity firm whose services are utilized by thousands of businesses and government agencies across the globe. Travel taking the hardest hit, long lines forming at airports around the world, thousands of flights grounded, leaving passengers stranded.
We're in Rome right now. I'm from Austin, Texas, and we were supposed to take off at 10:30 today on a Delta flight, 10:30 a.m. And it kept getting delayed until noon, and then it was canceled.
The outages impacting the nation's police and fire services. Law enforcement on alert for online actors and hackers attempting to infiltrate corporate and government IT networks by blasting bogus software fixes for the problem. Some experts defending CrowdStrike.
It's the nature of the cat and mouse game with cybersecurity that you have to get new defensive technologies out very quickly.
But others say this chaos was preventable.
It's frankly shocking that in 2024, it's possible for an outage like this to occur.
At least a dozen hospitals around the country also affected, some canceling elective surgeries. President Joe Biden briefed on the outage. The White House says his team is in touch with impacted organizations. Meanwhile, CrowdStrike scrambling to deploy a fix. The CEO apologizing for the chaos in a post on X and promising to get systems back online.
And airlines are now beginning to slowly come back online, but it is expected to take some time before they're fully back up and running. Delays and cancellations expected through the morning and into the early afternoon. Morgan Norwood, ABC News, New York.
Welcome, everyone, to the Wake Up Call channel. Now what you're seeing after the world tech crash, everything crashed at once, is you're seeing the mainstream media try to explain to you why everything crashed at once, because a lot of people out there are confused as to why would one thing cause all of these things to lose the internet, all of these banks, all of these airports to go down, 911 to go down, civilians to lose access to the internet. They don't want you to realize that they literally have a switch where they could turn the internet off at once. They need to explain this away so that people say, oh, okay, that's why it went down. And you'll, in fact, if you try to tell people about what's coming with the grid shutdown and how they're going to flip a switch, the people that you explain this to are being programmed to automatically dismiss that notion with this notion that they're giving everybody, that CrowdStrike is conveniently everywhere. And the world learned the hard way on Friday after everything went offline for the most part. Now, that news clip that I played for you in the beginning, of course, you heard the man saying, well, you can't blame CrowdStrike. You know, it's not their fault. We need new measures. We need different security measures, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, everybody out there who's been paying attention and listening to my channel, you heard the key word that they said in that news clip: infrastructure. And what we're seeing is the sabotaging of our current infrastructure, which is done by design. Now, this is obviously a globalist plan, a New World Order plan. In fact, they even have a card in the Illuminati card game, floating point error. And again, people don't pay that much attention to the Illuminati card game anymore. But of course, everything we see going on, we see in this card game that came out in the 90s. And this is a specific wording, or this is the specific wording on the card. All over the world, computers get weird. And that's pretty much the narrative that we've heard. All these computers on the fritz, right? And again, this is about sabotage. So let's take a look at the company that they're telling us is behind it, CrowdStrike, which apparently is everywhere, but nobody realized it before, because CrowdStrike is just another government entity which is shielding itself as a corporation, because that's how this whole thing works, right? We, of course, can see the connection between this company, CrowdStrike, and the World Economic Forum. All one has to do is go over to the World Economic Forum's website, right? The World Economic Forum partnership with CrowdStrike, right? You can see it right on there. The partnership against cyber crime. CrowdStrike is one of their partners. And of course, when we talk about sabotaging infrastructure, and that word infrastructure is so key, and it's one of those words that people kind of just glance over. They go, oh, infrastructure. They don't realize that it's destroying all the things that we know as normal to bring in a new infrastructure. And that infrastructure is smart city governance. It's a new infrastructure run by artificial intelligence. They need to take down the current infrastructure, which is why you see chaos all over the world going on right now, not just with these security shutdowns. That's why you see all of this chaos going on with voting and politics. It all ties into this. And of course, they love to let us know that the U.S. federal agencies hit an outage as well because of the CrowdStrike glitch. But what they don't tell you is that the CEO, or the chief security officer, the CSO of CrowdStrike, of course, is a former FBI agent, because all of these guys end up leaving the FBI and the CIA and starting these companies like CrowdStrike. And you're supposed to believe that they just, they used to be in the FBI, then they just became a brand ambassador or a a worker for one of these corporations like CrowdStrike. And in fact, that's not the case. These are government entities, okay? The government runs and controls the internet. They've allowed you to use the internet for free so they can study your behavior, watch your thoughts, and get you dependent on the internet, which is why now we're seeing every single week, whether it's AT&T or Bank of America or this CrowdStrike shutdown or 911 being down, we're seeing them do this so they can watch just how dependent we are on the internet and on technology to survive. And then, of course, since they control the technology, since they're the ones who are the ones creating the chaos by shutting it on and off to see how people suddenly have chaos in their lives, they're going to do things like this to all of us, eventually shut it off for a period of time so that people beg for it to be turned back on, because most people will not be able to live without the internet. The internet is their source of knowledge. Again, this has to do with transhumanism and the digital identity as well, because they're going to force you into a digital identity with all of these outages and saying that there's cyber attacks and the only way to prevent one is everybody having a digital ID, and people will just go along with it. But what people fail to remember is that when the license first came out and the birth certificate, it was a big deal. People were not just running and signing up for this type of stuff. They didn't want the government to have that kind of control over them by just having, by having a driver's license or a social security number. And now we're at the point where people are so passive with what we're allowing the government to have, they're just going to continue to take and distract you with division and other stories like this that they put out there to make you think that there's a boogeyman or there's just a company that has a software malfunction. And then people just go, oh, it's a software malfunction. It's not what you're saying about a conspiracy, a global conspiracy for total control over civilians' lives. Well, of course it is, but they need to put this propaganda out there so the sheep will believe it. So who are the owners of CrowdStrike, right? I showed you that, of course, the FBI, the government, is behind CrowdStrike. But who are the owners? Who are the owners out in the public? Well, who has the most invested shares in CrowdStrike? Well, of course, BlackRock and Vanguard do, because BlackRock and Vanguard own everything. And every single event that you see going on, you could follow the trail, and it goes back to BlackRock and Vanguard, right? They own Microsoft. BlackRock owns Microsoft, Amazon, MSNBC, NBC, Fox News, so they own both sides, right? They own both sides. So by owning both sides in the left and right paradigm as well, they're able to manipulate both sides into doing what they want them to do. Of course, we know they own Pfizer, they own Lowe's, they've invested in everything, in all forms of media and all forms of technology as well. Now, we just saw BlackRock's involvement in the plotted attempt on Donald Trump's life, which of course we all know was not real. Donald Trump and Larry Fink are in fact very close friends. And of course they know that this is about behavioral control, and psychological operations are how they work in behavioral control, right? So we know that the shooter, because this is just this is just your scapegoat. This is just your Manchurian candidate. This is just your person that they blast on TV that they want you to think somehow got to, pass the Secret Service and outsmart everybody and went on top of a rooftop and just took his day off from work and did this. Of course, that's not true. But like I pointed out in that video that I did a couple days ago about the shooter and being in that BlackRock commercial, even BlackRock has come out and pulled the ad, which proves that it was the same actor in the commercial. A lot of people who are Trump supporters were coming over to that video and saying it's not the same guy. They don't even look alike. BlackRock admitted it's the same guy. And they, of course, pulled the ads off the air, but nobody's still suspicious about it, right? And again, when I talk about them manipulating everything and sabotaging all forms of infrastructure, don't forget some of the other events that have occurred, like the Palestine train crash, right? Which did what? It contaminated water. They put the town under martial law temporarily. And people just go, oh yeah, what about the civilians? They don't realize that that was deliberately done. Who was it deliberately done by? Vanguard and BlackRock. Who owns Norfolk Southern, like I covered at the time, BlackRock and Vanguard. You could see their footprint in everything. And remember, and I'll use the clip again in case you're new to all of this stuff. They want to control your behaviors, right? So they're forcing behaviors. They openly admit this, right? This is about behavioral control, which means if you haven't noticed how people even censor themselves in what they say, that's behavioral control, right? A lot of people out there don't say certain words anymore, or you're not allowed to on YouTube or other platforms. Why? Because of behavioral control. This isn't behavioral control for the betterment of humanity. This is behavioral control so they can control you, and they could obviously have control over your mind by making you fearful of saying certain things. What you're seeing right now is BlackRock and Vanguard forcing behaviors, because all of these things that you're seeing are going to continually traumatize people, like having the internet shut down, being stuck at the airport for days on end because the airlines are down. These are all things that they're doing to people to get them on board with what they ultimately want, which is a digital ID. But here's Larry Fink again talking about behavioral control and how they're going to force it on people.
Behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors. What we are doing internally is, if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted. Okay, you have to force behaviors. And if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted. Behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors.
So nobody should be surprised the connection between Vanguard, BlackRock, these cyber companies, and their connection to the government as well. They tell you that the government, that they're struggling. Oh, the U.S. federal agencies hit an outage as well, right? 911's down, the Department of Justice is down, all these government agencies are down. They're hitting the blue screen of death. Also, this is all deliberately being done. They want you to think that this is just something that happened because a company, and it can happen in the future because a company just does a software update, or there's some type of cyber attack that occurs. They never want you to realize your own government is behind it, because they don't want an unhinged society to come after them. In other words, if everybody out there knew that the U.S. government was behind this, people would band together and they would say, oh, in America, all these civilians who were divided suddenly are uniting over the fact that the government decided to play a little test experiment on their civilians and shut off the internet, shut off the power grid, whatever it is in the future, right? And upend people's day-to-day lives, which is what they're going to do. Because people are going to go along with whatever the government tells them in order to go back to normalcy. So they're going to continue to mess with you. They're going to continue to eventually have a major grid shutdown, a major internet shutdown for a short period of time. So that when they come back online and there's a great reset, which again, I can't emphasize enough, the great reset doesn't just, the great reset isn't just about what occurred in 2020 with the outbreak. Okay, there's more to the Great Reset. It includes your bank accounts. It includes when they say you'll own nothing and be happy. Well, how do you think they're going to get you to own nothing and be happy? You think they're going to come to your house and they're going to take stuff out of your safe they're going to reset everyone. Everything is online. And this just shows you the power they have over everyone now, because we've allowed ourselves to get dependent on the internet for banking, and get dependent on the internet for communications with email and everything else, without ever wondering, what is the internet? Who's behind the internet? You think it's just some corporation. Well, the corporation is the government. And the government, they're the ones who are doing this. Okay, CrowdStrike is everywhere. That's what they're telling us now. The world learned that the hard way. So they're going to explain to you how the world's tech crashed all at once. And here is their explanation from CNN, and the other mainstream media about why this occurred. When computers and tech systems around the world went down, snarling airports, closing social security offices, limiting jail operations, many people had one question: how on earth could it happen? A software update from a single cybersecurity company, US-based CrowdStrike, was the root cause of the chaos, underlining the fragility of the global economy and its dependence on computer systems to which relatively few people give a passing thought. Well, that's because the people out there have been handed the internet, given the internet, and not asked questions about who's behind it. Is it safe to even use? They just use it. They just use it, and they think that it's normal to just use it. They've been conditioned into using it over the last decade or so. But people like me and the people listening to my channel, well, we've given more than just relatively small amounts of passing thoughts to the dependence on computer systems. In fact, we've been talking about it for years. Why? Because we know that the government wants to force these things on all of us. And by pulling the plug and then telling you in order to get back online, you need a digital ID and you need all these other things you have to comply with, they're going to force compliance. And the digital ID, again, people out there don't realize the digital ID is the precursor to the carbon footprint. When the digital ID is in place, the carbon footprint is rolled out, you won't be able to avoid it. And nobody understands the connection between the two. The digital ID is going to track every single thing that you purchase, every single thing that you do, every single thing that you type on the internet. You're not going to be able to post comments in the YouTube section without being held accountable. Okay, the days of being anonymous are over. We've seen dozens of articles from the World Economic Forum themselves and other media outlets that have said, well, being anonymous online is dangerous because of all these ID hacks, et cetera, right? That's because they want the digital ID in place. And then, of course, at first they'll tell you, well, we're not going to censor people and do all this stuff. We're not going to track what you buy and do. That's the ultimate goal. But of course, they're not going to tell you that in the beginning or people are going to push back. So when they take everything away and they say, well, all you got to do now is get a digital ID and we'll get everybody back online. There won't be cyber hacks. Everybody will be on board because they're not going to be able to live without the internet. And they're going to make it so that you can't live without it. Right? That's part of the point here. To make it so, well, you can't have a business, you can't do this, how are you going to feed your family? These people are psychotic, okay? So this article goes on to say CrowdStrike is everywhere. Numerous Fortune 500 companies use CrowdStrike's cybersecurity software to detect and block hacking threats. Of course they do, conveniently, right? So does our own government. How convenient. Computers running Microsoft Windows, one of the most popular software programs in the world, crashed because of the faulty way a code update issued by CrowdStrike is interacting with Windows. Of course, I talked about Microsoft and their connection. Bill Gates has his hand in everything. Of course, he pretends that he's not connected to Microsoft anymore, but everybody knows that is not true. They just know what, they knew going forward that Bill Gates, if you connected the dots, was going to have his hand in everything. So they try to pull back on some of the stuff that Bill Gates is involved in. But this is important to note how they say in this article how to prevent this from happening again. The wide swathe of criticism of critical infrastructure providers affected by the outage is also likely to raise fresh questions among U.S. officials and corporate executives about whether new policy tools are needed to avoid catastrophe in the future. Okay? Quote, this is from the senior White House tech and cybersecurity official. We need to really think about our digital resilience, not just in the systems we run, but in the global connected security systems, the risk of consolidation, how we deal with that consolidation, and how we ensure that if an incident does occur, it can be contained and we can recover quickly. The chaotic scenario that played out Friday did not involve a malicious actor, but government officials around the world will likely be gaming out what might have been. And of course, they know what this is going to look like when they do it on a global scale with everything, including your electricity in the future. And they'll have their built-in boogeymen, like I've talked about, which will be Russia, China, all these countries they'll blame it on that are outside of your own country so that you don't rise up against your own government because that's the last thing they could afford to have happen. So watch the story, monitor the narratives, right? Because again, it's important to note when you bring these topics up to other people, just a family member, a friend, a casual coworker, watch how they respond. Right? If you bring it up, you go, oh, they just shut the thing down, like Leave the World Behind or this other predictive programming. Watch how they give you an excuse for why it went down. That's the point of this, right? They're programming all of the zombies and the sheeple who think that the news is to give you information. It's really just to condition and program them into having an answer for it so that they don't get suspicious as to what the global government is doing and how they're going to gain control over all of our lives in the future with the digital ID. And unfortunately, the more you tell these people about it, when it actually happens, you would think that it would have some type of an impact where they wake up, but it doesn't. And that's what this programming, this pre-programming does to these people. It was the same thing with the outbreak. I've been warning people for years and years and years. In fact, when the outbreak occurred and the potion was rolled out, so many people found my older videos because at the time they were still up on my old channels. I mean, I'm a new YouTuber, but you know what I mean. And they were like, wow, how did this guy know? And I said how I knew, because we all know, because we pay attention. We watch the news consciously. We pay attention to what the narratives are for the globalists. And then you expose it. It's easy to see, right? So you would think when that happened that people would say, oh, okay, these people know, or they talked about this beforehand, so this has to be some type of conspiracy. But when they give you these narratives, when they start feeding and pumping these out as to why this is happening, who's behind it, oopsie daisy, what can we do to fix it? What can we do to make sure it doesn't happen again? These people get programmed into repeating it. And then you go and try to explain it to them, and they're repeating the narrative that the government wants out there, which is propaganda. Okay? The word to use to inform people is sabotage. That is what they're doing. They are sabotaging. Vanguard, BlackRock, you could blame it on whoever you want. These corporations who are working together are sabotaging infrastructure to bring about new infrastructure, which is AI governance, which is, the boogeyman behind the curtain that you don't know, just like the internet. The AI governance, people are going to ask for it because they're going to go, well, it's not Donald Trump, it's not Joe Biden, it's not some racist or some hateful bigot or someone it's just a computer. It's perfection. It doesn't question things. It doesn't do this or that. They never question the man behind the curtain, which is really the theme of Oz, right? The Wizard of Oz. They never question the man behind the curtain, just like the internet. They just go along with it and they'll want it more. They'll be like, AI is great because AI doesn't see skin color anymore. It only sees equality. It's not a human. Humans see skin color and all that stuff. Computers and technology don't. And you'll be giving up all your rights. And you'll be giving everything up to AI governance, which is a surveillance state 24/7. Even picking your nose, they'll be watching and probably telling you then you can't pick your nose. Well, of course, they'll tell you you can pick it if you eat it because they'll tell you that that's nutritious for you. That's gross, but that's the truth. That's how sick and psychotic these people are, and that's what the world is heading towards. AI governance, and they have to do sabotage in order to bring it in, and that's what this is. Deliberate sabotage. I thank everybody for being here. Hope you're all doing well. God bless you as always and your families.